I'm getting so.
Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker. A quick recap of episode 1, real quick here, y'all. Well, let me tell you something. Look, Leon, look at, he got in trouble. He robbed a boutique with him and some of his friends, stole enough stuff to put him into the felony category, right? He ends up going to court. He gets 6 years for it. He ends up being able to stay at the jail, but he violates the trustee by walking off of the job, getting high, and he loses trustee. And the sheriff says, I'm going to teach you a lesson by sending you to prison. He sends him off to prison. When he gets to prison, he fits right in, right? Because everything is fast moving, right? Junkie's paradise. But Leon gets in debt, and he goes to visit High. When he goes to visit High, his mom, not understanding the prison and things and how things work, she goes and asks the officer, why is he like this? And the officer comes over to investigate, takes him back, gives him a piss test. He fails the piss test. And he takes him away, suspends the visit. But here's the problem with that. That caused a delay in Leon being able to pay his bill. And as a result of that, he got beat up really, really bad. Really, really bad. And he subsequently died. Now, at the end of the day, that's what happens in here. But let me get back to the story now that I gave you that quick recap. Now, when the nurses pulled back the covers, they saw his entire body after they removed the clothes because they were trying to figure out what was going on. They cut the shirt off of him, and they could see that his body had been badly beaten. His face was already bruised and torn up and swollen, right? So now they check for the pulse. They do all these types of things. He's gone. He been gone. He been gone. He's starting to wriggle. You understand what I'm saying? His body's starting to stiffen up. So they say he been gone. They said, did you just not notice this? The nurses asked, and the officer said, yes. And now all the kind of questions that the call is made. Internal affairs, the warden, everybody comes down there. And they call for the coroner. And before they take him out of the room, everybody's inside the room and they're whispering and they're talking. And nobody understands what's going on right now because the people in the pod, there's 2 people in the pod that know what happened. They beat him. In his cellar, they summoned his cellar. The warden has got him standing outside the cell and he's talking to him and he notices how everybody is watching, so he takes him inside the cell. He takes him inside the cell before they had taken Leon's body out of the cell. And they tell him, do you know what happened? They say to him, do you know what happened? And he said, no, sir, I do not. And they said, so when you were in this cell last night, did you notice anything strange about your cellar, Leon? And he said, no, sir, I did not. And he gave him that look. And his cellar looked at him with that look that we often have in here where it's like, you know I can't say nothing. So the warden gave him that look back. And he told the officers, take him to the back, lock him up, pending investigation. So the coroner came in and IA finished taking all the pictures and all of this and that. And they were in the process of putting that, that chemical they could put on the floor and then they could take that light to see if any blood on the floor. They did that. Blood is all over the floor. It's everywhere. They had walked through it. Everything is in the cell bloody. Blood is everywhere. So they get Leon's body on the gun and they take him out. They wheel him down. And nobody really knows at this point what happened. So the investigation goes on. And back in this time, y'all, it wasn't no cameras in the unit. This was a long time ago, y'all. Wasn't no cameras in the unit. So it was no way to know who went in and out of that cell other than the cellar talking. So internal affairs, they go in the back and they tried every trick they could. They put all the pressure down that they could on his cellar, and his cellar was too afraid to talk. He was too afraid to talk. He just wanted to go home. He wasn't a coward. But let me tell y'all something. Back in the day, it's a little bit different than it is today. You got cameras everywhere. You got a lot of people in the penitentiary that they'll say and do anything to save their own hide. And I understand that. I understand that. But back in the day, what would save your hide is keeping your mouth shut. That's that on that. Because they wouldn't protect you. They couldn't protect you. They would tell you all of this and that, and they put you in protective custody and isolation, all this and that. But people will come back in protective custody just to get you. So he kept his mouth shut. And nobody found out at that point what happened. Who did this? and nobody in the building was talking. They kept the whole building locked down for months. Nobody said a word. Nobody. But in the meantime, while they were waiting to try to find out what happened, guess what? Leon's body is just still sitting there. They hadn't even told his mother that he had died. See, what happens is this, right? When we come into the institution, they talk to us and they put a file together on you, right? And in that file, part of that file is they want you to give a name of a person, a relative most likely, and it's usually your mother, father, sister, brother, somebody that you're close to, your girlfriend or your wife or husband if you're in a female institution. They want you to give them a name and a contact number in case anything that happens to you, they can call them and let them know, especially in situations where there's a death. They want to be able to call. They have the chaplain call the family members. But in this situation, y'all, nobody called anybody. Nobody called anybody. And almost a month and a half later, about a month and a half, they receive a box in the mail from the prison that contained Leon's possessions. Paintings that he had drawn because he was a painter. Some of the things that his mother had sent him in his property, sweatsuit, things like that, sneakers, socks, underwear, things like that, pencils, a few pictures that he had taken, all of these types of things that he had owned. All the things that he had owned fit in that box. And when his mother got the box, she looked at it and she opened it up and she saw all of these things. And when she saw all of these things, something washed over her. So she looked in her phone book. They still had phone books back in the day, y'all. And she called the prison. And she asked to speak to the warden, but the warden wasn't there. So the lieutenant that was on duty said, "Ma'am, I think I need to put you in contact with the chaplain." And she said, "Just tell me what's happened to my son. Why did I get this box?" And he said, "Ma'am, that conversation will be with the chaplain." So he disconnected himself from her and connected her to the chaplain's office. Chaplain answered it. "May I help you?" She gave her name and she told him who her son was and all this and what she had just received in the mail. And the chaplain said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your son has passed away." And she said, "When?" And the chaplain looked at his calendar and he said, "About a month and a half ago." She broke down and she started to scream and shout at him like, "Why are you just now telling me this? Why did I not find out about this?" And the chaplain had no answer for it. He said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And as she continued to yell and yell at him, he became irate and he hung up the phone. And she called the prison right back. By that time, her husband had come into the room and she's yelling at him. She said, "Leon is dead." And he's like, "What?" So when the phone rang and rang and rang and the lieutenant picked up the phone and he answered the phone, she said, "Why didn't y'all tell me that my son was dead?" He knew that it was her because the chaplain had called him and told him that she's upset. So when he saw the number, he recognized it, and when he picked up the phone, he said, "Ma'am, calm down. Please calm down. I can't talk to you with you yelling." So by then, her husband had taken the phone. He said, "Man, somebody needs to tell us what went on." So the lieutenant started to tell him, "Look, so we don't know what happened." So his father, Leon's father, said, "Well, where is his body?" And the lieutenant, he could hear the lieutenant flipping through some papers. And as the lieutenant flipped through the papers, it stopped. And his father said, "Man, where is my son's body?" And the lieutenant said, "Sir, according to my records, your son was cremated on such and such a date. His body was not claimed." And his father, Leon's father, said, "We didn't even know he was dead. How would we have the opportunity to claim his body?" And the lieutenant had no answer. See, because this is what happens, y'all. If somebody dies in the prison, if somebody dies in an institution, that family member or whomever it is that's a contact person, they call it the emergency contact, that person is called. And when that person is called, if it's a death, they are told what happened. And they have a certain amount of days. I think it's 3. I'm not sure about that. But I think it's 3 days to accept the body, to claim the body. And if they don't claim the body, then the state takes it upon themselves to bury that person or cremate that person. And in this particular situation, his body was cremated. Ain't that suspicious? Ain't that suspicious? So the father said, well, where are his ashes? And the lieutenant, he paused and said, I don't know. I'm going to have to look into that. So the father gets off of the phone. He just hangs up. He gets off of the phone, and his wife, they just sit there and hold each other, and they cry. And they cry, and they cry. And then after a while, they get themselves together, and his mother starts to call the other family members to tell them what happened. And everybody is irate about this. Everybody wants answers, but nobody can find the answers to what they need to satisfy the situation. Nobody's telling them anything. So the next day, Leon's mother and father, they get themselves up and they go out to the prison. And when they get to the prison, they ask to speak to the warden. And the warden invites him in. He comes into the institution. They bring him to the office of the warden. The warden sits him down and he tells him how sorry he is for what happened. So they start to ask him questions, and he can't answer any questions. He said, ma'am, it's an ongoing investigation. So the father said, well, what have you learned so far? And the warden said, we can't talk about it. It's an ongoing investigation. So the mother and the father of Leon, they continue to ask him questions, and he continues to respond in the same way, and they get upset. So they say, you can't tell us anything about how our son died. And then his mother, she tells him, she said, my son was just in here for shoplifting, stealing. He only had a 6-year sentence. He wasn't a bad kid. He was addicted to drugs. He came in here and he died. And you can't tell us how he died. Can you tell us how you found him? What condition was his body in? Anything? And the warden said, I can't discuss that with you. He said, but when we are done with the investigation, we will make sure that you get a full report so you can know what happened to your son. And the warden stood up from behind his desk and he said, ma'am, sir, if that's all, I got work to do. So they both sat there and they looked up at him at the same time, and they stood up. And the father said, this is not the last that you'll hear from us. And the warden just looked at him and didn't say a word and escorted him out of the office. And as they were leaving and going down the street, driving away from the prison, his mother, Leon's mother, said, this is not over for me. She said, I need to know what happened to my son. And her husband looks at her. He said, what are we going to do? I don't know where we start. So she said, he's got to have a boss. So they did their research. They didn't have any clue as to how the government worked at that time. They didn't understand the structure, the organizational structure. So they looked into it and they found out that it was a commissioner that was over the prisons. So they got in touch with the commissioner and they talked to the commissioner, and the commissioner said he had no answers for them as well. And it was under investigation. But he assured them that when he found out that he would let them know. He said this is something that he wanted to know about as well, and he wasn't going to let it go. But right now, it was nothing that he could say. It was nothing that he could tell them. Absolutely nothing. He had no answers. So his mother, it was a hard few months for her. She grieved and grieved, and she would sit by the phone every day, waiting on somebody to call, checking the mail, waiting on a piece of mail, anything that would tell her what happened to her son. They couldn't even have a funeral for him. They didn't even have his ashes. They didn't even have his ashes. It's as if he just disappeared. He's gone. He's gone. Think about that. Nothing left of him. Nothing left of him. As if he never existed. So his mother, she decided that she was going to find out. And to do that, she had to get really, really cunning and smart about what to do. So she was talking to a lot of people, and she had a lot of friends that worked at the hospital, you see, because his mother was like a candy striper. You know how those people that go into the rooms and talks to all the patients and try to keep them cheerful and hopeful and all. That's what his mother did. That's what his mother did. And she talked to the nurses, and she learned that, all she had to do was to do that. She can volunteer to do this type of work to help them out, but she couldn't do the nursing duties because she didn't have a license to do that. But she could volunteer and do these types of things. So she asked one of the nurses, she said, do they have volunteers at the prisons? Do they have volunteers at the prisons? And she said, yeah, they have people that do that, So she started to contemplate, how do I get back in that prison? How do I get back in that prison? Because they knew what she looked like. They knew what she looked like. So she knew she would have to change her appearance because they would recognize her if she came back up there looking the same way that she looked. So she went to the beauty salon and she had her whole hairdo redone. She put on the eyelashes. She did everything to try to change her appearance as much as she could. But she knew that wouldn't be enough because she had gotten on Leon's visitation list for that one visit. So they knew what she looked like in the past, and they knew her name and all of her identity. Social security number, birthday, everything. They knew all of that. But she was determined. So the next thing she did, she put in for a legal name change. Legally. You could do that back then. She went down to the courthouse, got the applications, filled them out, and within a few months, she was under another name. She still had the same social security number though, but she was under another name. She said, this will have to do. It's going to have to do. So the next thing she did was she filled out an application, a volunteer application with the Department of Corrections to be approved to come in and render aid to some of the patients that were at the hospital, to keep them up, to give them hope like she would do at the hospital. She didn't even tell her husband what she was doing, but he knew something was up. She didn't tell him. So when her application came back, approved for an interview, she got nervous. She said, this is it. I got to get through this interview. I got to find out what happened to my son. So she set up all that night rehearsing, trying to sound different, act different, because she had to convince these people to give her this job as a volunteer. So when she got to the interview the next morning, she sat there and the interviewer came in and he looked at her. She didn't recognize him. And he went through her file and he said, okay, very impressive. She has the references and all this and that. And he said, I think that you will be just fine for this job. He said, do you have any preference of where you would like to work? And she said, yes, I would like to work at such and such prison. I'm not far from that. I'll be able to get there in about 15 minutes if they needed me. And he said, that'll work out just fine, man. So she got the job. And now it was time for the ultimate test, because the people that she had met at the prison when she was trying to find out what happened to her son, this is where they were. So now she had to get past them. And if you want to know what happened when she got to the prison, you're going to have to tune in to the next episode. This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.